Hey Eric, thanks for taking the time to speak to us today.
Hello there.
Of course, we'd like to just dive straight into the heart of today's actions up and down the country, but would you mind talking a little about yourself and your background? You know, what led you to Central London today and the Million Mast March?
Yeah, essentially I campaign for people's human rights, and that's been sort of central to my philosophy for a number of years, which is what brought me into contact with a lot of other people as well, who are protesters of one sort or another. Coming down to London today, I'm obviously marching for a lot of people that I represent who are vulnerable and disabled, who come from different backgrounds, who are oppressed by this government. So it's a good opportunity to make your voices heard, come down, speak to people, enlighten them, share some truth, share some fun.
You say oppressed by this government. There are very, very sort of clear opinions on that then. So would you say that your opinion of the current political corporate structure that maintains a kind of stranglehold over everyday folk is flawed? I mean, I assume you'd have some pretty strong ideas on how to change that. Would you like to care to explain?
I've got a lot of ideas for how to change that. But in answer to your first part of the question, yes, government is not only fundamentally flawed, it's fatally flawed. And for a number of reasons. I suppose the best analogy I can give is that of the classroom of 10-year-olds. Now, we've all been in school at some point as a 10-year-old, and we know what happens when a teacher leaves the classroom. It's chaos, right? Teacher comes back in again, order is resumed. Unfortunately here we've got a situation where we have decided that democracy resides in the tick of one pen, blunt pencil, every 5 years. And that's hardly democracy because it doesn't require any kind of engagement by the public in a democratic process. So we have what's arguably called a parliamentarian democracy, and I would argue that it certainly is that. It's a democracy for parliamentarians, it isn't a democracy for the electorate, and it's about time the electorate understood that. So there needs to be greater voter engagement, there needs to be greater support for what's actually going on, and there needs to be wider reading too. I think a lot of it is down to education. We are very poorly educated in this country.
So would you say that that's sort of disenfranchising sort of the population from getting involved in politics?
It will do. I think a lot of people have this idea that government is somehow benign, maybe gets things wrong occasionally does things we don't like, a bit greedy on the expenses, but by and large it's the good old British Empire doing its thing on a day-by-day basis. And if you're not affected by it, if you don't come into contact with it, then it doesn't really affect you. But if you are subject to any aspect of dealing directly with government, and many people are, you realise actually that all that glitters is not gold by any stretch of the imagination.
So sort of education and sort of like informing the public of what their rights are and how to use them within the system that's laid down.
I think it's partly that. I mean, certainly knowing one's rights, and a lot of people say, "Oh, I know my rights," but you only know your rights if you're in a position to enforce them. If you're not in a position to enforce them, you've got nothing apart from temporary privilege, and that's not what we're campaigning for. So, accountability.
So we're opening the minds, raising awareness.
Yeah.
And transparency within the sort of current political system.
I think that's got to be a starting point. I think people need to understand that if they're going to effect changes, then they have to actually be upstanding themselves as individuals. We can't any longer expect someone else to do it, or someone should do something about this, or someone should do something about that. No, if you want something done, then stand up and do it.
I suppose that would be sort of very applicable in education, the sort of standards in that country.
Well, education is a complex issue. I'm not an educationalist, but what I would say is this: we are programmed from a very early age as human beings, and most of that programming, certainly in our formative years, is all about controlling us and obedience. Okay, learning to follow orders. Okay, I mean, it becomes ingrained in us, right from being toddlers to being young children to going to school, and so on and so forth. The next minute, you're an adult and you want to settle down and you've got to comply with another set of rules. This is all well and good. I haven't got a problem with that. I think there's mileage in that. I mean, we need to have a sort of some sense of cohesion. But the problem lies in the fact that the things we need to know have been kept hidden from us for a long time, and I think it's only the arrival of the internet that has started to level the playing field.
The internet, that leads me on to a whole new area of conversation. I mean, this has all been sort of kind of leading me towards The Mask.
Yes.
Anonymous, known as the last boss of the internet by some, mischievous pranksters by other.
Yeah.
But there's no doubt that awareness of the collective has ever been higher.
Correct.
Do you support Anonymous? Would you class yourself as anonymous? If so, what's your take on the internet hate machine?
Well, to take that in reverse, yes, I'm happy to be part of Anonymous. I'm happy to buy into the central idea behind Anonymous. I don't necessarily agree with some aspects of their behaviour, but that's a separate issue. We're all human beings, and I think this is one of the things when everybody can be anonymous. If the price of becoming anonymous is just a sort of a £4 mask, it does allow for all sorts of people to be in a movement without necessarily having the same motivation as others. My motivations for Anonymous are entirely pure, so I'm absolutely proud to be associated with it from a basic point of view. Do I think it's a hate machine? I don't know. I mean, I think there's certainly the capacity for that. I don't think there's any doubt, you know, when we see what Anonymous is capable of. But then there are many other things that are very positive that Anonymous does, and we shouldn't forget that. And I think from a wider perspective, if I look at just what I do, you know, that is part of Anonymous. It's doing something to help other people. I'm doing it my particular way, perhaps, but nevertheless, it is something that's widely supported by members of Anonymous. So, you know, I can work in conjunction with almost anybody, and if that helps them, if it helps their agenda, then it's a purpose well served. I don't limit my anon type of activities, as it were, to any one aspect of Anonymous. In relation to your mask question, I have a mask and I do wear it quite frequently. However, is it essential for me? No, it's not essential for me personally, but I wear it because it is something that I'm proud to identify with Anonymous. I'm proud to identify with the iconography that sits behind it. You know, yes, I can see that plenty of people who are going to have arguments about, oh, you're following this movie or you're following that. Those are irrelevant little bits and pieces as far as I'm concerned. Right, the mask represents something fundamentally far more important for me. Right, it talks about both my anonymity, if I choose to have it, as well as my individuality. Not behind the mask, not because of the mask, but the mask is just a sense of we are all sitting on the same side. You know, I can see someone else with a mask. It doesn't matter who's behind it, who it is. It's obviously someone that supports this, that, and it's like going to a football match. You know, see someone with a red and white scarf, you know they support the same team that you do, or blue, for that matter. But yeah, so it's a form of identification. You know, it's a form of being able to, for people who are normally sat behind keyboards, to get out in public and cover their anonymity. But again, for me, a lot of people know me anyway, so you know, me adopting a persona, covering myself up isn't necessary. People who need me can find me, people who know me will know where to find me, so I'm not exactly anonymous in that respect. But from a core philosophical point of view, 100%.
Well, that leads me to sort of like current mass media perceptions of Anonymous.
Yeah.
The notable word at the moment would be trolling.
Yeah.
Trolling,
yeah.
I mean, the mass media seems very sort of keen to sort of demonise Anonymous and other internet-based protest groups as nothing more than hateful teenagers or antisocial techies. What would be your take on this?
Well, that would be the bleating over the right-wing propaganda machine. I don't expect anything intelligent to come from them, and I haven't done for years. You know, quite frankly, if they want to attack Anonymous, it's a clear sign of fear, right? Let's be absolutely clear here. Anonymous, as a group of people, I'll say no more than that about it, but as a group of people, has a lot of ability, a lot of skills, and a lot of resources. You know, and given that it's driving so much of the information that we see nowadays on the internet, not necessarily all badged by, you know, official and anonymous press release, it isn't. You know, there are lots of organisations that we all work with and we're sharing information left, right and centre. But it is the act of Anonymous to do that in the first place, because we talk about freedom of the internet, and that's sacrosanct. So in the same way that we are from the internet and that we are in effect masters of it, I don't think there's any dispute over that either, the press will see that translates into declining readership figures, declining sales, it's the end of the road for printed media in the way that we know it. Not yet. It's not going to happen overnight. Absolutely not. But the shift away from mainstream media to alternative media, or online media now, let's not call it alternative because that's becoming mainstream in its own right, okay, is where people want their news. I spoke, funny enough, to someone yesterday who didn't believe in Facebook. And I said, but that's where all the information is. And she refused to get it. I'm thinking, well, how can you enlighten yourself if you're not in social media? It doesn't have to be Facebook, there's plenty of other social media, but Facebook is arguably the boss of social media, and Anonymous is the boss of the internet. I think that's the best way to describe it.